Let's talk Tier 2, shall we? It's been really interesting, the World Cup on that front, and a lot of conversation out there on Twitter, and a lot of your questions have come in on that front. Really good. Mark Collette has come in with this one. Japan to replace Italy in Six Nations would be a start. I reckon he did that at the end. He was quite pushy in it. But it's a good point. And kind of on that, at RP Andrews 23, how feasible would a Six Nations, including Fiji and Japan, be? So we're in the same kind of territory there. What do you think, Ben?
It's lovely to think about that, but it's not particularly great for your carbon footprint, though. And I don't think that that's ever going to be the case. South Africa into the Six Nations, now that's something that could easily happen in the next few years. You're already starting to see them migrate into the European leagues. Super Rugby, the distances travelled, all that stuff. So I can see them going into there. And you've got to ask questions on should Italy remain in the Six Nations? They've had a long crack at it. They haven't got any better. And perhaps it's time to maybe do something around promotion relegation for that slot. The rest of this Tier 2, I mean, for me, it's put Fiji regularly against New Zealand and Australia in the Championship with Argentina and Japan, and start to promote that and give them a little bit. I mean, when Fiji come and play England at Twickenham and they get maybe 50 grand, when the All Blacks will be getting 2 million plus to play, there's something wrong there. So they need to give them a small percentage of the gate, and that would fund the resources that they need to run their programs properly. So we talked about this earlier, Nick, like John McKee, the Fiji coach, he'll come to Europe and he'll try to watch as many games as he can, but they've got no strength and conditioners that can come across and do things with the individual players. And just adding that amount of ability to put more into your players is really important.
Yeah, I met John McKee when I was a director of rugby last year, and the poor guy was getting around so many clubs by himself. He just doesn't have the resources, whereas you compare and contrast with the England coaches. They're at games every week. They're in the clubs every week. They're feeding back. And I know it's different geographically because the coach has to move across to Europe, etc. But just the general resources, when Ugo was playing for England a while ago, a conditioning coach would come to the club, top up fitness, top up weights, a coach, top up skills. So the amount of resources they've got does make a huge difference.
It's interesting actually on that. If you pull out just one single part of a team, if you look at Russia, and the one area Russia did perform, Ugo, at this Rugby World Cup was up front. Their scrum was really good and they're good around the maul. And a guy called Mark McDermott, a former Munster player and Shannon player, of course, and he coached the Ireland under-20s to a World Cup final against New Zealand back in the day, and he left rugby for a while. He's back in it. Now, he's over there actually doing the job. He hasn't been flown in by World Rugby. That's his job, to coach that Russian pack. And the pack were good. The talent is out there. They just need to be placed, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. But you look at the top teams in World Rugby at the moment, the one thing they've had is consistency of coaching. And at the moment, I see in the teams that are outside of the top 10, they've got coaches that get parachuted in for 3 or 4 years and then they're gone again. And then it's a brand new team coming in with their idea, with their own structure, with the same old problems. And the one thing, in fact, we were talking about it yesterday, I'm actually uncomfortable saying the word Tier 2. I almost feel like they've been bracketed. It's like it's been suppressed, and they're almost putting a ceiling on how far they can achieve, because apparently Japan are Tier 2, but they're number 6 in the world rankings this morning. So I don't really get that. I think strip that away and there should be a far greater competition, and there's got to be a consequence if you're not performing well. Italy, over the last 10, 15 years, have not performed well. There needs to be a consequence for that.
So do you think you should be like a top 10 side? Or top 20 side, and
Absolutely.
your involvement is based on your position in that?
Yes.
I thought the World League should have gone ahead, but Six Nations, didn't want that to happen because that would have encroached on them keeping their money and making the most of those things. But if you have a proper seed, you have you're in the top 10, you're Fiji, and you're ranked in the top 10. You are getting to play those top tier teams every year. You're not just hoping that one of them gives you a call and go, you can play in a November test. We'll fly you over, play for your hotel, but that's about it.
I mean, there's your world rankings just there. I mean, that's your top 5. I don't understand the need to have a label on Tier 2 at all. I mean, I know you're in disagreement about Japan coming to the Six Nations.
It's more logistics, really.
Logistics, because if they played in the Southern Hemisphere, it's 17 hours to South Africa, it's 11 hours to New Zealand, it's 9 hours to Australia. I totally get it. That's 6 to 10 at the moment. Japan now down to number 7 after losing this morning. But until there is a uniform global league, the Six Nations can just worry about the Six Nations, not worry about what's happening in the Southern Hemisphere. I want to see the Six Nations, all the Seven Nations, as competitive as possible. And I certainly believe by having Japan in it, or a Georgia, or someone like that, will give the teams outside of the top 10 far greater competition.
Nick, based on form over this World Cup, do Georgia beat Italy?
No, I don't think they do. I think the Italians would have too much for them. I think the Italians do have very good players coming through their system as well. Their 20s have been getting better and better. So, no, I don't think they do.
Yeah, Canada down in 22nd, and there's a team that we expected an awful lot more from. And there's a lot of talk about maybe bringing the Rugby World Cup to North America. I don't know if they do a Canada kind of USA thing, but maybe it needs something like that. Maybe one thing we've learned from this World Cup is if you move the competition to a different part of the world, that part of the world benefits as a rugby team, essentially.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? And there's an argument that maybe you could have a World Cup in a couple of cycles in North America, and we've seen that, the Tokyo Olympics is next year. Next cycle it's Paris and it's France World Cup the year before that, and then we've got Los Angeles in 2028, and maybe you could have a World Cup in North America in 2027. But it's more for me about what targeted funding, and World Rugby, there's lots of things they could do. They only have a certain amount of money, and the unions actually need to start to say, for the greater good of the game, we're going to start sharing some of our profits to allow these nations that are outside the top 10 to grow their programs. Because Canada, down in 22nd, in 1987, they were probably better than they are now. So we've got to do something to try to help those, and that means money in the right places, and not, as Ugo said, parachute coaches in that don't live in those countries and can't make a big difference, however good they are, but actually make sure that you put things there that are going to leave a legacy for those nations.
Legacy is the big word for me. Like we've gone to Japan, everyone's absolutely loved it. They've been a marvel. Let's not let their journey end at the end of this World Cup. 2007, Fiji knocked out Wales out of a World Cup. What's happened since then? Nothing. Are we going to have this same conversation in 4 years' time, worrying about what's going to happen to the guys outside the top tier? It's just not progressed. And so for me, the starting point is sit around a table and talk about how we can get far greater competition far more regularly for guys outside the top 10.
But who sits around that table? Because it's really interesting getting your view on things. But a lot of chat, Phil has sent in this really interesting message because it's given us a view of what people out there think. And that's what this show is all about. Phil Harrison says, by bringing all these private investors into the game, I guess he's referring to CVC being involved in the Premiership and other competitions. Are we taking some of the power away from World Rugby, who are a charity, let's not forget, to change things for the better? Is there a danger in that? And that's the view from the rugby fans, Nick, so it's an interesting one.
It is, and I think Ben's idea of sharing some profits is a fantastic idea and is the way forward. However, if you're a big nation and you've got a lot of bills, then how much money do you give them? And I think it's very, very difficult because there's so many people at that table trying to do the best thing for rugby, but also looking after their jobs and their nations. And they still want to be the best. So to be the best, they need to spend the most on the best coach, on the best resources. So it's how much do you share and when do you share it is the tricky part, isn't it?
Yeah, Phil's absolutely right. If more and more funding is coming into these top nations and that's diluting the power World Rugby have got, then we're going to see a real power shift that they're not going to be controlling the game, that the big unions are already kind of controlling the game. France, New Zealand and England, they're the ones that are making the big decisions that are going on in the global game. And so it is a little bit of a worry. And we do need to step up. Those top nations do need to say, we are going to give some money and some resource to these other nations. And do you know what? They might even get pretty good as well. Yeah. But for the bigger game to survive, for the top table to get wider, we've got to the values that we hold dear and the way we are in rugby, they've got to try to do that at union level to help the other nations.